Beneath the soaring arches of the concordant spire, the weight of two worlds pressed against the reinforced glass. The station was a masterpiece of geometry and desperation, hanging like a needle of light threaded through the absolute black of the void. Inside the ceremonial hall, the air was recycled and thin, smelling faintly of ozone and the scorched copper of high-voltage conduits. Commander Elena Vance stood with her hands clasped behind her back. Her posture was a shield, rigid and unyielding, designed to project a strength she wasn't sure Terra Nova actually possessed. Beside her, Kalen Thorne felt the sweat slicking his palms. He adjusted the synapse collar around his neck, the metal cold and biting against his skin. This device was supposed to be the bridge between their species, filtering raw human emotion into the sterile tonal logic of the virions. A low, metallic hum. Then, the obsidian doors at the far end of the hall slid open. On a nearby observation console sat a chipped ceramic mug of cold synthetic tea. It was a forgotten relic of a morning that had felt ordinary. Now it was a tiny, mundane anchor in a room about to be filled with the impossible. Kalen looked at the mug for a fraction of a second, wishing for the simplicity of a world where tea still stayed warm. The Virion delegation entered with a fluid grace that made the human guards look like heavy, stumbling things. They were tall and translucent, their skin a shifting canvas of deep blues and liquid silver. Their movements were synchronized, a silent dance of biology and intent. At the center of the group walked the High Sovereign, but it was the figure to his left that stopped Kalen's heart. Alara, the Sovereign's daughter, moved like a sculpture made of moonlight. Her skin didn't just shift. It rippled with a soft, bioluminescent glow that seemed to react to the very rhythm of the room. Kalen gripped his collar, his mind racing through 3 years of linguistic training and diplomatic subclauses, which meant the protocols were useless unless he could find the courage to speak past the manual. Have you ever looked at something so beautiful it made you forget the language you were born with? If you were standing in Kalen's boots, would you follow the rules or follow your instincts? Commander Vance stepped forward, her voice amplified by the room's acoustics. She spoke the formal greetings, her words flat and safe. The Virion Sovereign responded in kind, his voice sounding like the chime of crystal against crystal. The synapse collar hummed against Kalen's throat, translating the complex Virion tones into the dry, bureaucratic English of the treaty. But Kalen wasn't listening to the translation. He was watching Alara. He noticed the way her skin pulsed with a faint, nervous violet when she looked at the human delegation. It was a microsensation, a detail the synapse collar was designed to ignore in favor of literal meaning. The introduction of the cultural liaisons was supposed to be a scripted affair. Kalen had practiced his lines 1,000 times. He was meant to say, "I am honored to facilitate the growth of our shared knowledge." It was a sentence designed to say nothing at all. As Alara stepped toward him, the silver in her skin deepened into a shade of blue that reminded Kalen of a Terran ocean at twilight. Her eyes were dark, like the center of a nebula, and they held a curiosity that wasn't in the diplomatic briefings. "Stay with us. The real conversation is about to begin, and it's not one the diplomats planned for." Kalen felt the stifled professional anxiety of the room begin to crack. The synapse collar began to vibrate, sensing the sudden surge in his heart rate. He looked at the princess, then at the rigid back of Commander Vance. He knew the cost of a mistake. If the Sovereign found out, Terra Nova would be isolated before the first trade ship even left the hangar. The summit moved into the deeper chambers of the spire, away from the ceremonial light and into the cold functionalism of the trade suites. Here, the holographic maps of Viros Major's moons pulsed with a clinical white light. The virions sat in a perfect, still semicircle, their translucent skin now a deep, focused indigo. Near the ceiling, the rhythmic, mechanical click of a ventilation fan that needed oiling provided a jagged soundtrack to the silence. Commander Vance leaned over the console. She activated the synapse collar's broadcasting array, her voice echoing with the dry precision of a legal scholar. But as the proposal for the joint orbital research zones entered the Virion network, the atmosphere curdled. The synapse collar hummed with a frantic, static energy, struggling to reconcile the Terran concept of partnership with the Virion concept of total possession. The Sovereign's skin didn't pulse. It froze into a jagged, crystalline pattern of obsidian and blood red. The Virions rose as one, their bodies radiating a sudden, frigid heat that made the station's sensors wail. The Terran guards shifted their weight, fingers hovering over the triggers of their pulse rifles. Kalen Thorne watched the holographic map fracture under the weight of the Sovereign's anger. He looked at Alara, whose skin was flickering with a desperate, flashing silver, the color of terror. Because if the data was corrupted, the entire sector would become a graveyard. Kalen reached up and tore the synapse collar from his neck. The metal housing hit the floor with a dull, heavy thud. He stepped forward into the gap between the two delegations, ignoring Vance's hissed command to stand down. He looked at the Sovereign, then at Alara, and he spoke with the raw, unpolished honesty of a man who had seen the abyss and chosen to laugh. The room burned. Silence. Kalen spoke of fear and hope, his words unaugmented by linguistic filters. He admitted that humans were clumsy and grasping, but he swore they were not thieves. He spoke of the tea mug left in the hallway, a symbol of a life that didn't need treaties to be valid. Alara moved then, her skin blooming into a forbidden, radiant gold that reflected off the metal walls and the wide, dark eyes of her people. She bypassed the synapse collar's dead receiver, translating Kalen's raw intent into the melodic resonance of the Virion soul. The obsidian patterns faded from the Sovereign's skin. The blood red vanished. In the silence that followed, a single truth resonated through the cold corridors of the spire, bridging the immense, terrifying distance between two civilizations that had spent centuries staring into the dark and wondering if the other would bring fire or a hand held out in peace. The Virions looked at the humans with a new kind of dread. They admired the heat that had saved them, but they feared the fire that fueled it. On the bridge of the Concordant Spire, the light of Viros Major caught the edge of a discarded synapse collar. The metal bridge was empty now, the echoes of the summit replaced by the hum of a distant sun. A single golden smudge of Virion bioluminescence lingered on the dark steel of the human-built floor. Subscribe to stay with the keepers of the legend. We'll be back tomorrow, as the stars continue their silent dance across the void.